It's Timothy again. After hiking Angel's Landing twice and learning about some of the worst accidents that happened there, I don't think I'll ever return. From a photographer whose own tripod tripped him right over a cliff, to a group of friends trapped in a stone pothole, convinced a human pyramid was their way out, only for it to end in the craziest way possible. It was April 27, 2014, on the upper spine of Angel's Landing in Zion National Park, Utah. By early afternoon, a man who had climbed it professionally, deliberately, and without any particular recklessness would not be coming back down. Benny Drew Anderson was 41 and had spent the better part of 15 years photographing other people's best days. He ran a freelance operation out of Boise. Weddings, engagements, the occasional commercial shoot, and he was good enough at it that referrals kept him booked without much advertising. What his clients didn't know, and had no reason to, was that 14 months prior his own marriage had ended in a way that left him quiet about it in public and visibly worn around people who knew him well. He had taken this particular job, an adventure elopement for a young couple from Colorado, because the rate was good and the location was the kind of shot that built a portfolio. Now, before we go further into the incident, there are a few things you have to know about him. He had done difficult terrain shoots before. He was not careless with his equipment or his footing. He had researched the route. The decision to accept the booking made complete sense on paper. Angel's Landing is a permitted, maintained trail. The chain section is demanding, but it is not technical climbing. Thousands of people complete it annually, including photographers with gear. Benny had packed light by his standards. To minimize weight on the trail, he carried only one body, a wide prime, and an aluminum travel tripod. The final ridge narrows to roughly 4 to 6 feet across in sections, with the canyon falling away on both sides. Wind through the canyon that afternoon was intermittent, not sustained, but present in irregular gusts that several other hikers noted in their statements afterward. Fine sand and grit often collect on sections of the exposed sandstone, reducing traction even when the rock appears dry. The couple had moved ahead by roughly 15 yards when Benny crouched near the right side of the trail to address a bootlace that had come loose. The position put him low, near the outer edge, with his tripod planted to his left. Multiple hikers behind him later told rangers they saw him look up toward the couple, raise one hand in what appeared to be a casual wave or signal, and begin to stand. The movement was unhurried. Nothing about it registered as dangerous to the people watching. His right foot came up first and landed on a section of sandstone that sloped slightly outward. Not dramatically, but enough. Witnesses described seeing his body shift backward almost immediately, the kind of shift that in a flat environment would have been self-correcting. As he tried to recover, his left foot struck one of the tripod legs behind him. The contact did not stop him completely, but it prevented him from planting a full step back toward the center of the trail. His balance deteriorated almost instantly. He slid down the steep sandstone face below the ridge before striking a sandstone ledge approximately 70 feet below the trail. The impacts that followed were audible. The bride, still ahead on the chain section, described hearing sounds she could not immediately identify, a series of flat, irregular concussions echoing upward through the canyon walls. Emergency personnel arrived at Scout Lookout shortly afterward. Recovery personnel accessed the body several hours later. The coroner's findings indicated catastrophic blunt force head trauma consistent with high-velocity impact against rock, with secondary injuries to the thoracic cavity and upper extremities sustained during continued descent. The injuries sustained during the initial impact were considered unsurvivable. The elopement photos were never released. Imagine if your last working hours were spent documenting the start of someone else's relationship while your own life and relationships were already behind you. But at least Benny's story was finished. The next one wasn't. It was October 18th, 2016. on a narrow technical sandstone route below Angel's Landing. Canyon has absorbed too many close calls to flinch at one more. However, that morning, it would not be a close call. Renzo Jr. Cade was 34 and had spent a decade leading beginner instruction courses for a regional guiding outfit in southern Utah. He had a reputation for patience, for doing things correctly the first time and the same way every subsequent time. Colleagues said he was the kind of instructor whose students left better than when they arrived. His wife was 3 days past her due date with their first child. He had told his co-instructor the evening before that he intended to be on the road home by early afternoon. The trainee with him was 22 years old, 3 weeks into certification, and had fewer than a dozen supervised rappels logged. He later told investigators he had watched every one of Renzo's movements that morning with careful attention, not because anything seemed off, but because nothing did. Renzo's hands moved through familiar sequences with the ease of someone who had done them several thousand times. The thing nobody discusses is how experience can make the exact mechanism of an accident invisible, not just to witnesses, but to the person making it. Renzo's phone rang shortly after they reached the anchor station. It rang twice, stopped, then rang again. He answered. The call was from his wife's sister with a labor update. What began as a quick update turned into several rapid questions about contractions, timing, and whether he was close enough to get home if things progressed. He had the rope in his hands when the call came through and continued working through the figure 8 follow-through used to tie into his harness while trying to answer. The trainee watched and registered nothing incomplete. Renzo paused twice during the knot sequence while speaking on the phone, then resumed where he believed he had left off. From several feet away, there was no obvious indication the retrace had not been completed. The sandstone walls at that elevation compressed sound strangely. A light wind moved through the upper crack system above them, and rope against rock made a low, continuous friction sound as Renzo prepared to demonstrate the rappel transition. The trainee was positioned roughly 15 feet above on a ledge with a clear sight line down. What the trainee heard first was not a fall. It was a single sharp report. The sound of a loaded rope releasing its tension instantly, like something mechanical failing mid-cycle. Short and dry. Then the rope went slack and the ledge below was empty. Now, I want to be clear that there is no version of this where the trainee could have intervened. The drop was approximately 80 feet onto a slanted sandstone shelf. 2 hikers on a separate trail roughly 200 feet across the canyon reported hearing 2 distinct impacts in close succession. The first was described as flat and dense. The second, less than a second later, sounded different, harder, and wrong in a way they could not immediately account for. The trainee descended on his backup line and found Renzo unresponsive below. Investigators concluded that injury patterns were most consistent with Renzo likely striking feet first at velocity, shattering both lower legs on contact before forward momentum carried him headfirst into the shelf's upper edge. The skull injuries were apparent without examination. He used his emergency radio to contact park dispatch immediately. Rangers arrived on scene approximately 45 minutes later via the technical approach trail. The coroner's report identified the cause of death as severe traumatic brain injury from high-force cranial impact. The figure 8 knot had not been completed. The retrace was absent, and under body weight, the incomplete knot had pulled apart rather than locked. Renzo's son was born 3 hours after the accident. I think about that boy growing up being told his father was meticulous, careful, the best at what he did, and all of that being entirely true. Now the next guy is just as competent. The only problem is that he just looked away. It was July 9th, 2018, on the final exposed ridge of Angel's Landing, where the sandstone holds heat past noon like fired clay, and the drop on either side exceeds 1,000 feet. Nobody on that trail that morning came expecting what happened at the final approach. They came for the view. Darnell White was 39, an ultramarathon competitor from Portland, Oregon. with 11 finishes in races exceeding 50 miles. His training logs, recovered from his phone, showed 4 runs in the 7 days prior. 14 months before this trip, a cardiologist had flagged an abnormal ECG reading that suggested a possible underlying heart condition during a pre-race screening and recommended follow-up testing. The paperwork was in an envelope in his home desk. He had not told his wife, Priya. Not knowing any better, Priya had organized the anniversary trip as a surprise. The lodging, the trailhead shuttle, all of it. The hike was her idea. Now I'm just guessing here, but I'm thinking he had no clean way to decline without explaining the condition. And explaining it meant admitting he had kept something from her for over a year. His decision to keep moving, declining water, insisting he felt fine, is readable within that same frame. His identity was built around distance and pain tolerance. Stopping on a recreational trail because of a heart condition he had never disclosed in front of his wife was not a straightforward thing to do. He stopped 3 times in the final 400 feet and each time adjusted his pack without changing anything. A family of 3 from Colorado was descending the final section as Darnell and Priya climbed. The father, a former paramedic, said he registered Darnell's breathing before eye contact. Audible from 15 feet, high and labored, inconsistent with their pace. He and his daughter moved aside to let them pass. He told investigators later he almost said something. Then Darnell laughed, short, unprompted. The father said it was the moment he started to say something. Darnell's left knee gave first. He did not reach for the chain. He went forward and down, face first into the sandstone, and the sound, flat, dense, carried down the ridge. The father was moving before it finished. Priya called his name, then again. Close to 30 seconds passed before she dropped beside him. The father told investigators she appeared to think he was joking, that the laugh had set the wrong expectation. Both began compressions. A nurse who had been descending below heard the shouting and climbed back up. The nurse took over CPR within 90 seconds. She later said he had no color when she arrived. After several cycles, blood appeared at the corners of his mouth. Consistent, she noted, with the compressions, not the fall. He did not respond. A hiker lower on the trail placed the emergency call. Rangers and emergency medical technicians reached the site approximately 40 minutes after the call was made. I don't think 40 minutes feels long until you're the one counting. Darnell was transported from the ridge and pronounced dead. The medical examiner's findings described fatal cardiac arrhythmia, a sudden catastrophic disruption of the heart's electrical rhythm, most likely triggered by sustained exertion in extreme heat. The underlying structural abnormality identified during the post-mortem examination was consistent with the condition suspected after the abnormal screening ECG 14 months earlier. Priya found the unopened cardiology envelope in his desk 3 weeks after the funeral, filed under tax documents. There was no note with it. I genuinely don't know how you hold that. Now, denial isn't always cowardice. Sometimes it's the only way a person knows how to stay who they think they are. That doesn't make it less fatal. That just makes it human. The next story has none of that. No secret, no warning, no bad decision you can point to. It was May 22nd, 2015, on a sandstone trail near Scout Lookout. Nobody on that trail was measuring the angle of a slope or thinking about what years of erosion does to rock under a rubber sole. That is, until a water bottle rolled downhill and a woman stepped off the path to get it. Keisha Jordan was 32 years old and worked as an elementary school librarian in southern Nevada. She had taken the week alone to hike Zion, a trip she had reportedly planned for over a year. She was traveling light, carrying a small day pack, and had already completed the lower switchbacks without incident. She was hiking behind a family when their young son dropped his water bottle. It tumbled several feet off the main path onto a lower sandstone shelf. The boy became visibly upset and started crying. Keisha, who spent her working life around children, did what I think probably felt like the most natural thing available to her. She offered to get it. The shelf she stepped onto looked manageable. It was not vertical. It was not far from the trail. Witnesses later described it as a gradual slope, the kind that reads as stable until weight is already committed. What I've also read afterwards was that according to reports, the surface was unusually smooth. Years of seasonal runoff had polished the rock in a way that was not obvious from a distance. She reached it and straightened up. Her right shoe broke traction first. Witnesses described the movement as sudden but not dramatic. Not a flailing fall, just a clean, single loss of grip. As she turned back toward the trail, her weight shifted backward before any correction was possible. She slid several feet down the smooth sandstone and went down hard, the rear of her skull contacting a protruding rock formation at the base of the shelf. Witnesses said that she convulsed for a short period and then stopped moving entirely. She was on her back, partially on the shelf. Then one of the parents placed a call to emergency services. Park rangers reached the scene in approximately 30 minutes. Keisha was unresponsive on arrival and was transported by emergency personnel. She was pronounced dead shortly after. The coroner's findings, in plain terms, indicated death from severe blunt force trauma to the occipital region of the skull, consistent with a backward fall onto a fixed rock surface. Catastrophic traumatic brain injury and intracranial hemorrhage were listed as primary contributing factors. No other significant injuries were present. Her school held a small service the following week. Staff and students left books on her desk for several days. She was buried in Nevada. I've turned this over a long time and I still don't have a clean resolution. Keisha Jordan was kind at the exact wrong moment, on the exact wrong surface, and that is the entire story. And the next one is almost the exact opposite of that. It was September 11th, 2013, at an informal viewpoint roughly 80 feet below the summit of Angel's Landing, where the sandstone drops away without ceremony, and the only thing separating a person from open air is the quality of what they're standing on. Dallin Jamil was 37 and worked as a field geologist for a mid-sized mining consultancy in Salt Lake City. He had spent over a decade evaluating terrain across the Colorado Plateau. He had brought his girlfriend on the trip partly as a vacation and, from what she later described, partly as a field education. He had spent most of the 3-mile ascent explaining sandstone weathering, identifying depositional sequences, and pointing out which surfaces retained structural integrity and which had begun to delaminate. In my opinion, that kind of deep, unshakable confidence in reading the land was exactly what made him so unsettlingly blind to the fractures forming. Near the ledge below the summit, he directed her attention to an exposed section of Navajo sandstone on the slope's outer face. He gestured toward the footing beneath him and explained, with the patience of someone accustomed to being right, that the protruding section appeared well integrated with the surrounding formation and showed no obvious signs of separation from where he was standing. Then he stepped toward the edge, apparently intending to demonstrate the feature more closely, identified a protruding section of stone and transferred his weight onto it. What he almost certainly did not account for was a joint-bounded, weathered sandstone block within a pre-existing fracture network. A thin ledge of Navajo sandstone separated along vertical joints and bedding planes, with a shallow void beneath it from long-term undercutting and granular erosion. From above, it still reads as continuous rock, but it can be fully detached along hidden fracture lines. This is not a failure of training. It is a failure of what cannot be seen. The afternoon had settled into dry, still heat. At least 6 hikers were positioned within close range, resting near the chain anchors, standing along the natural shelf framing the west-facing exposure. The sandstone around them was pale orange, fractured into long horizontal bands. Nothing about the formation looked unstable. This stretch of trail does not offer warnings a person without instruments could detect. The flake detached without preamble. Two hikers roughly 15 feet south described hearing a single sharp crack, followed immediately by the scrape of rock on rock. Dallin dropped from the ledge, roughly 30 to 40 feet across a broken, sloped face before the first major impact. The sound was not a single event. Witnesses described a sequence spread across 2 to 3 seconds, each strike distinct, each separated by brief silence. A woman near the chain anchors described it as the sound of something heavy being stopped repeatedly. He struck at least 2 shelf ledges on the descent. One of those impacts likely produced the left arm fracture, a complete open break consistent with high force contact against a narrow edge. Hikers who reached him within minutes described the arm as visibly distorted, extended at an angle inconsistent with its normal range. Blood marked the rock surface below. He came to rest against a vertical wall and was not moving. I don't think the rock looked any different to him than it did to anyone else standing there. A hiker with a satellite communicator initiated the emergency call. Rangers arrived on foot approximately 30 minutes later, but it was too late for him. The coroner's findings in plain terms: severe blunt force trauma to the chest and skull from multiple sequential impacts. Several ribs fractured inward. Significant cranial injury consistent with high force contact with a hard surface. Cause of death was traumatic brain injury compounded by internal hemorrhaging. The open arm fracture was severe but not a contributing cause. His girlfriend gave her statement that afternoon and walked back down alone. People who knew him described the accident not as carelessness, but as the kind of failure that feels cruel in its specificity. A geologist undone by geology. As some of you are already aware, overconfidence in expertise is its own blind spot. The more reliable your knowledge has been, the easier it becomes to stop accounting for what it doesn't cover. Dallin probably knew what he was looking at. I think it's unfortunate that he just couldn't know what was underneath it. The next story has none of that. No expertise, no arrogance, no one trying to prove anything. Just a mother and her son, one water bottle, and an unforgiving trail. It was June 25th, 2017, on the West Rim Trail approaching Angel's Landing. And by early afternoon, the sandstone corridor had stopped feeling like a destination and started feeling like something that had already sealed itself around 2 people who didn't know it yet. May Arlook was 58, a part-time bookkeeper for an agricultural supply company in rural Idaho. Co-workers described her as methodical and dependable, someone who showed up early and finished things without being asked twice. Her son Johnny, 28, supervised warehouse shifts at a regional distribution facility. The trip south had been months in the planning. A budget drive, split costs, pack light. The single 1-liter bottle they shared between them reflected the same logic that had organized the rest of the trip. We've all been stingy, but for them it was economical thinking applied to the wrong environment. That bottle was not born from carelessness. It was a calculation that worked on the flatlands and failed entirely on exposed sandstone at 95 degrees. Johnny had absorbed most of the water during the steeper ascent sections, which made physical sense given the effort required. By the time they reached the upper approach, Johnny was already showing early heat stress, including slowed responses, intermittent dizziness, and moments where he paused longer than necessary before answering simple questions. May had been quietly conserving for at least an hour before witnesses noticed anything different, and by all accounts, she repeatedly indicated she was fine when asked. That detail, the quiet insistence, the small wave of the hand, is the one I find hardest to move past. By mid-afternoon, the trail had narrowed and the sun pressed directly overhead with nowhere for the heat to escape. The canyon walls, pale orange and close, reflected it back. A group of hikers returning from the Upper West Rim Trail passed the pair around 2:15 p.m. and noticed May's gait had become uneven, her hand finding the rock wall to steady herself at intervals. One member of that group told rangers afterward that May's words were slurred when she responded to a casual trail greeting. Not dramatically, but enough that the woman turned and looked back after passing. She kept walking. Most people do. The collapse came approximately half a mile beyond Scout Lookout on the West Rim Trail. Witnesses described it as a gradual heaviness, her steps shortening, her posture dropping, followed by a sideways slide against the canyon wall. What followed was harder to watch than the collapse itself. Johnny attempted to move her almost immediately, first pulling at her arms and then trying short, dragging efforts uphill, each lasting only seconds before he had to stop and brace himself against the rock wall. Between attempts, he appeared confused, repeating her name without clear response and struggling to maintain balance in the heat. Several hikers told him directly to stop, to leave her in shade, to send someone ahead for rangers. He continued in short bursts for roughly 30 minutes, total elapsed time, broken into repeated attempts separated by exhaustion and disorientation. By the time he stopped moving, he was stumbling and could not answer direct questions. He sat beside her on the trail and held the empty bottle. Several minutes later, he collapsed nearby and stopped responding to questions from the hikers gathered around them. By the time bystanders attempted basic cooling measures such as shading, wetting clothing, and offering water, both individuals were already in advanced heat stroke. When rangers reached the location, all they could do was announce what was already apparent. Both deaths resulted from heat stroke compounded by severe dehydration. At critically elevated core body temperatures, the brain and organs begin failing in sequence. Their deaths led to renewed seasonal advisories from park officials specifying a minimum of 1 liter of water per person per hour on exposed summer trails. It just sucks to know that the guidance that had already existed before June 25, 2017 simply wasn't on the bottle they packed. Our last story features not just two, but a group of people who had everything they needed, tried every option they could think of, and still couldn't get out of a hole in the ground. It was August 4, 2018, inside a narrow sandstone drainage in the Zion Wilderness not far from Angel's Landing. A group of 5 had been inside the canyon for over an hour. Jace Joaquin Dominguez was 27, a lead mechanic at an independent auto repair shop outside Las Vegas. He had completed 6 recreational canyoning trips over 3 years, including 2 technical descents of comparable difficulty. The August trip was a planned single-day canyon route with 4 friends of similar experience in the Zion backcountry surrounding Angel's Landing. Earlier in the route, the group had used a short rappel to enter a water-filled pothole that was normally straightforward to cross during drier conditions. What they did not anticipate was how much runoff had accumulated inside it. The pothole they dropped into was roughly 12 feet across and ranging from chest deep along its rim to significantly deeper in a central depression where footing disappeared entirely. The walls were smooth and steep, erosion polished into near featureless curved stone. They had descended without the extended anchor system that elevated water conditions typically demand, and they had not carried specialized pothole escape equipment because conditions were expected to be normal for the route. Looking at Jace's background as a mechanic who'd handled tricky descents before, he probably trusted his hands-on know-how more than any piece of technical gear. And that confidence might have been the very thing that undid him. They spent close to an hour working through options, stacking packs against the wall, attempting partner boosts along the driest sections, repositioning toward a lower lip on the east side. Each attempt failed. The rock above the waterline carried a thin layer of algae and mineral biofilm, nearly invisible, that released under load. After the third failed boost, Jace proposed building a human pyramid. One member braced himself as the base. A second climbed onto his shoulders, while the others positioned themselves nearby to stabilize the effort. Jace then stepped up from the side, hoping to clear the lip and pull the rest of the group out. The walls blocked direct sun at that hour. The water was cold and silted from upstream runoff, and sound moved flat and directionless through the enclosed stone, every noise arriving slightly wrong. The base members stood in approximately 4 feet of water, feet spread on the curved floor. The second climber mounted his shoulders. Jace moved in from the side and began the ascent. It took less than 2 seconds. The base member's left foot contacted submerged algae-slick sandstone and rotated outward without resistance. The structure failed instantly as balance collapsed across all 3 climbers. Jace's right ankle struck the pothole lip, and a sharp crack was heard before he went under. He surfaced face up, roughly 4 feet from the wall, but a recirculating current kept pulling him under, repeatedly submerging his airway despite attempts to hold him steady. One member called his name, another held his head above water, but they couldn't maintain his airway due to his weight and the hydraulic pull. He was not responsive within seconds. They struggled to maintain his airway while supporting his weight in chest-deep water. He was not resuscitated. A satellite communicator was activated at approximately 11:40 in the morning. A technical rescue team reached the site on foot and rope access roughly 2 hours later. The coroner's report listed drowning as the cause of death with blunt cranial trauma from contact with a submerged rock surface as a contributing factor. The ankle fracture was perimortem. A funeral service was held the following week at a church near his home. Co-workers attended as a group, and a collection was organized among shop staff for his family. I want you to imagine those 4 people in that pothole with him. They did everything they could, and they still have to carry this.